Legend of Zelda is a franchise that needs no introduction. It's one of the most critically acclaimed video game franchises of all time, and in recent years has even beaten out the Red Plumber in sales. And despite how beloved these games are, and the fact that I've been playing video games for about 20 years now, I haven't played the majority of them. Real quick, I'm just going to throw a little graphic up on screen showing which ones I have and haven't played. You can pause if you want to. So starting today, I'm going to be playing every mainline entry in the franchise and reviewing them as we go along. And to start, we have to go all the way back to the original, to a time when mullets, popped collars, and sequins were cool. The Legend of Zelda is an action-adventure game developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1986. When starting the game, we get a brief explanation of the story. Many years ago, Prince Darkness Ganon stole one of the Triforce with power. Princess Zelda had one of the Triforce with Wisdom. She divided it into 8 units to hide it from Ganon before she was captured. And with this, shoddy English translation aside, our goal is clear. Find the 8 shattered pieces of the Triforce and save Princess Zelda from the Prince of Darkness Ganon. We play as Link, a seemingly random boy who has absolutely nothing to do with this. Which isn't even a joke. In the game's manual, you get the story behind why Link is involved at all, and it's literally just because he helped this random old woman he found who told him he needs to destroy Ganon. So Link does what any rational boy would do and runs headfirst into dungeons full of monsters just because this random woman said so. But when we finally start up a new game, we find ourselves just standing in the middle of nowhere, with nothing. And this immediately tells us one thing. In The Legend of Zelda, you will need to explore and find things completely on your own. There is no guidance for the majority of the game, and on the occasions that there is, it's limited to cryptic hints from NPCs found through the world. This was foundationally different from other games at the time. A fun fact about this game's development is that it was actually made by the exact same team that made the original Super Mario Bros. Game for the NES, and the two games were being developed simultaneously. This gives me a great contrast to emphasize to you guys just how different this game was, with Super Mario Bros. Essentially being the more typical game for the time, and Zelda being that completely original creation. The team internally during this development period even split all their ideas into 2 separate groups, the Mario group and the Zelda group. But getting back to the game, there's a cave on screen already, so we go in there and are greeted by an old man providing us with a sword. This gives us the bare minimum that we need to progress through the world, so we can now go wherever we want. And I actually mean that. Practically the entire overworld map is open to us right from the very beginning. This makes The Legend of Zelda one of the first open world games ever made. The exploration here was absolutely unrivaled at the time it came out. The sheer size of the world, the fact that you could explore it all from the very start, and then the freedom. In order to collect the 8 pieces of the shattered Triforce, we need to complete 8 dungeons that are found around the overworld map. And the core combat of the game isn't anything to write home about, but it's enjoyable. Link can face in 4 directions, and if you press the A button, Link will swing his sword in whatever direction he's facing. His shield is also a very important item, because if an enemy projectile hits you while you're facing it and not attacking, it will deflect off the shield, dealing no damage. And another fun mechanic is that if you're at full health, Link's sword attacks will actually shoot magic projectiles out of them that travel across the entire screen and deal as much damage as your sword normally would. Like I said, nothing to write home about, but it gets the job done and it's a pretty good time. But before we even go to the first dungeon, there's so much we can do. I actually spent the first 2 hours of my playthrough for this video just exploring the overworld. And by the end of those 2 hours, I ended up having 6 hearts compared to the 3 that you start with, an upgraded sword that does double the damage of the base wooden sword, bombs, a candle that lights things on fire, a ring that cuts the amount of damage taken in half, and a potion that fully restores my health when used. The fact that all of these things are available to be found by the player before they've even engaged with the main quest is incredible, and speaks to how confident the team at Nintendo was in their open-ended exploration-based design. And along with that, there are secrets to be found everywhere in this game. See that tree? Well, maybe if you burn it with a candle, there could be a hidden staircase where you'll be rewarded with 100 rupees, rupees being the central currency of the game. Or what about that cliffside? Well, maybe if you place a bomb on the right spot, you'll find a cave and be rewarded with a heart container, increasing your maximum health capacity by 1 heart. Even while exploring the main dungeons of the game, if you place bombs in the right places on the walls, you might find a hidden room with a bunch of treasure, or even just a shortcut that brings you closer to the end of the dungeon. Stuff like this that rewards the player just for thoroughly searching everywhere they go is great, but as I'll come back to later, sometimes the team at Nintendo went a little too far with this idea, and something that might catch you off guard when playing the game is that the combat is surprisingly challenging. And that's part of what makes all this exploration and upgrade collecting so rewarding. Since the basic enemies early in the game will be more than enough to kill you, finding that first heart container is exciting since the increase from 3 to 4 hearts is a pretty major one. It might not seem that big to those that haven't played the game, but it's an increase from dying in 6 hits to 8 hits immediately on finding it, so it actually makes a really big difference. But when I finally decided it was time to progress the main quest, I was surprised at just how well these tie into the core progression of the game. Along with just collecting the pieces of the Triforce, every dungeon has a unique item for the player to obtain. These include things like a raft to get across bodies of water, a stepladder that can cross one-tile gaps, a bow, a boomerang, and more. What makes these so great is that they are either new weapons to add to your arsenal, or traversal items that allow you to collect even more upgrades in the overworld. For example, using the raft to float over to an island with a previously unobtainable heart container on it. Some of them also open up later dungeon entrances, like finding the recorder in the 5th dungeon and playing it at a lake to open up the 7th. But these items also bring about one of the more annoying parts of playing The Legend of Zelda. See, every time you want to use a different item, you have to pause the game to open the inventory and swap between the items in there. And this is something that was just a limitation of the time. The NES controller had the D-pad, 2 face buttons, and the start and select buttons. The A button was bound to the sword, and the B button was bound to whatever item you have equipped. So because of the lack of buttons on the controller, they had to settle for just opening up the inventory to swap between whatever items you might want to use. And I know that sometimes when I bring up something like this that was a limitation of the time the game was released in, there are people who feel like it's a null criticism since there was nothing to be done. But I'm generally of the mind that if something is annoying while playing a game, it's annoying whether there was a solution at the time the game was made or not. So even though there was no better way of doing the item swapping here, I still feel like needing to open and close my inventory constantly killed the pace of the game in places. And while progressing through the game, you'll notice that the enemies get more and more ridiculous. Some of the enemies in later dungeons are very strong in order to counteract how much stronger Link will get throughout the course of the game, but some enemies just take it a little too far for me. There are a couple that I'll talk about specifically, the first one being the Likes. These guys are incredibly tanky, slow-moving enemies, but if they come into contact with you, they will suck Link in and eat his shield. And this would be fine, but the magical shield is an item that is absolutely necessary in the late game and costs 160 rupees to purchase. And for context in regards to how much 160 actually is, it should be noted that the maximum amount of rupees Nintendo allowed players to carry was 255. So if one of these guys grab you, you're gonna need to leave the dungeon that you're in, go to a shop somewhere else in the overworld and buy a new shield, which is assuming that you already have the rupees on you so that you don't need to go around the overworld grinding enemies for money. And then there's the Wizrobes, the guys that make the magical shield a necessity. These guys will teleport around, often teleporting straight into you if they get the chance to, and if you're in their sightline, they spam magic projectiles at you that deal 4 hearts of damage at base, 2 hearts with the first defense upgrade, and 1 heart with the final defense upgrade that you can only get in the final dungeon of the game. These 2 bastards together in a room are enough to make anyone just want to put the game down and go outside for the afternoon. And if you ever finish this game without a guide, then you're probably eligible for a senior's discount. Remember when I said that Nintendo sometimes takes the philosophy of discovering secrets a little too far? Well, what if I told you that the entrances to the 7th, 8th, and final dungeons are all secrets? I already mentioned the one where you have to play the recorder at a pond to open up an entrance, but what about the one where you have to burn this exact tree in the overworld? Out of the entire overworld, this one tree hides the entrance to the dungeon holding the final piece of the Triforce. The final piece that you are going to need in order to complete the game. I'm telling you man, stuff like this is the exact reason that the Nintendo hotline ever existed. But once you have all 8 pieces of the Triforce collected, it's finally time to rescue Princess Zelda, who's being held by Ganon in Death Mountain. And this dungeon does not play around one bit. In all actuality, it's more of a hybrid between a dungeon and a maze. Here on screen, I'll show you the map for the Death Mountain dungeon, and what you can't see here is that a lot of portions of this dungeon aren't actually connected by doors, and you need to go around through underground tunnels that will spit you out in random parts of the dungeon. So not only are the most difficult enemies in the game found here, but it's also an endurance match where you'll desperately be trying to find the final room. I spent a little over an hour just trying to get through Death Mountain between all the time I spent hopelessly lost and dying and starting back at the beginning. But eventually, you find your way to Ganon, and the final boss fight starts. And this one is actually fairly interesting. Ganon will turn invisible and teleport around the room shooting projectiles at you. Each time he does this though, he follows an exact pattern, so you have to predict where he's going to appear next time and hit him with your sword. After you've done this a few times, he'll turn brown and you have to hit him with the magic arrow, which hopefully you found as it was hidden in one of the many tunnels here within Death Mountain. Thankfully, I did find it along the way, so I finished off Ganon, and that was the end of the game for me. Overall, The Legend of Zelda was a really enjoyable adventure to revisit, and the fact that there are still some people out there who consider this to be one of the greatest video games ever made, even 37 years later, is testament to just how strong its core design really is. There's a lot of small annoyances with this game if you go back and play it without any prior experience, but I feel that the positives really do outweigh those negatives, and it's a game that I played through really quickly because I just couldn't put it down. So all up, I'm going to give The Legend of Zelda an 8.4. But what do you guys think? Those of you that have played the game, those of you learning about it for the first time through this video, let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to go ahead and leave a like, a comment, a subscription, anything to let me and the algorithm know that you did enjoy. It helps me out a lot, so I really appreciate it. And if you like videos like this, I will be making more videos reviewing every other mainline Zelda game, so I'll have the playlist for that linked right here on screen.